Hello. I just want to do a quick run through on a couple of things that I noticed that are just totally whack. So for one, um, I had a LinkedIn account, just Freudian slipped. I was gonna say Veganese on LinkedIn had over 10,000 connections and all that, and they shut me down toward the beginning of the pandemic, the so-called pandemic, the plandemic, straight up. Delete me, YouTube, see if I give a fuck. It's so stupid that, like, what is this? These are all companies that, like, started in America and solidified themselves with what, probably tons of, like, American money, you know? And then they turn around and just, like, bite that hand that fed them. Like, they're probably still subsidized by the American government and people. Like, I wouldn't be surprised at all. But anyway, that's not why I fired up this recording. It's because they banned me on LinkedIn. They permanently banned me. And I've been banned in the past off and on and all that, just those little, like auto ban kind of things, or like some people get offended and report you, and then you got to verify your identity and whoop de whoop, and then next thing you know, your account's back and everything's fine for a couple months. But I don't see what the problem is. Like, all these social platforms have a block button. Like, you can say, hey, well, at least most of them, not like the more private ones like Slack. Obviously, you just have to either take it or leave it, as far as I understand. But with like LinkedIn, Twitter, all that, you can block people. You know what I mean? So it's like it's freedom of speech. Like, even if somebody wants to sit there and cuss and like show you their butthole or whatever, like, you just hit block and that's it, and you never have to worry about it again. But some people report stuff, and that's understandable to a degree, I guess. Like, maybe that shouldn't go into everybody's feed. I don't know. I'm personally against it, but that's a gray area, I feel like. But freedom of speech, ultimately, no. These companies, they're written in English, started in America, whatever. They should be free speech platforms. The only person I see making any fuss about it is Trump, and I don't even feel like he's doing enough. He's like over there in sort of a selfish sense, like, oh, if Twitter messes with me, then I'll pass legislation. And it's like, whoa, look what's going on with everybody else, what's already been going on, these people you're supposed to be representing and stuff. Um, but that guy sees enough hate already. He sees undue hate. It's ridiculous. But anyway, what's going on here is, so every couple months now I go in and I say, hey, I'll contest my ban. And this is the message that I pretty much more or less always get back from them, that's saying, that due to the number and gravities of these violations and everything, and it's a total auto response. It's not even specific to my case. And then if I try, it says right here, you may reply to this case for up to 14 days. And if I go in and try and, like, say something about it, which they close it right away. And if I go in to do that, it will say, we need to verify your identity. And then I go and verify my identity with them, which is fine. It's the same identity, same exact files I sent of the front and back of my ID card from, a year or more ago, whenever they started doing this to me. And then they just send me another one of these boilerplates whenever I try and verify my identity, so I can go in and like say anything to my own defense. I have zero defense. It's like total Manchurian Candidate, Orwellian, just ridiculous. And the other thing is that this is my biggest issue. Like, screw these platforms. We knew what we were getting into with them. I knew with all this Web 2.0 platform crap. It's like, it was so obvious. The web was free to begin with. We didn't need these social networks. These were like a handout to people who didn't want to learn some basic HTML and go set up like a GeoCities page or something. It started with, forgetting the name of that site, MySpace. That's what it all started with. But MySpace was, like, I guess too radical or something. But that got, like, whatever the millennials were back then, the people in between Gen X and millennial, whatever stupid crap. Um, it got all of those people, which was basically like my generation and everybody in high school through my generation, which I don't even want to say. I feel like everybody's like discriminated against all the things that we're supposedly not supposed to discriminate on, especially in America because it's freaking illegal, is the things that everybody's being discriminated against right now, like skin color, age, gender, all that, religion. Give me a break. What's going on is it's everybody's polarizing, and just in case you don't have a sense of what that means in this context, is that if you think of like the North and South Pole of the planet, how they're like, they're so far apart from each other, right? You can't, if you think of like to the other side of the world, that's like the polar opposite. So when things are polarizing, people are spreading apart. The ship's splitting down the middle, and people are jumping to one side or the other. They're no longer like, oh, hey, welcome, I'm a moderate. I'm middle of the road. I lean a little left culturally or a little right fiscally or whatever their gig is. Now they're feeling this like panicked desperation, which is kind of normal to a certain degree in an election year, for a presidential election year in the United States, but it's not a healthy thing at all. And I've always been disgusted by it. And this whole century, I've managed to not get on the political bandwagons during election years. I remember at the Clinton thing, I was trying not to, in the mid late 90s kind of thing. I was really like, no, I'm not going to fall for it again. And then next thing you know, I was, trying to pick sides or something in my mind. I don't vote. I might have voted a couple times in the past or something, but I say keep your hands clean. You're going to get blood on your hands if you pick one of these people. And it's not, no votes voting for this person. Screw it. They're both two ends to the same goal, or two means to the same ends. Like that kind of a thing. In all honesty, I don't know. With the illusion that I'm seeing, I feel like Trump probably is a populist president, and they don't like populist presidents. They don't like populist candidates. And populist can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people, but populist basically means that they represent that so-called 99%, like all of us. And they're supposedly against that, or at least some particular 1%. I don't think they're against everybody's idea of what that 1% might be or something. Like even with Trump, you can see, for better or worse, he is cool and in bed to some degree with all the people that you might think he's against. You know what I mean? You can find pictures of him chumming it up with Obama, with North Korea, with China, um, with Bill Gates, like with all that stuff. They're all they all have their eggs in both baskets. Of course they have more eggs in one basket or the other, and all that kind of thing. But anyway, trying to get back to more of the point of why I'm doing this recording again, is that when I click through, basically, I can't get into my data, and that's the big thing that really irks me, because in this day and age, obviously, all these people with this call out culture crap and everything, which is just accusations, it's really accusing, they're a Nazi, right? And you got both sides doing it. Like, you've got both, that's just the key word, is like, they're a Nazi. You know what I mean? And if you really go back and look at what a Nazi really is, or what a fascist really is, oftentimes the person pointing the finger fits that description equally or worse than the person they're pointing the finger at. Not to say, but that's where it gets dangerous too, because sometimes, what if it really is a person that really is that Nazi? Like it's like the little boy who cried wolf, or once you find that Nazi, nobody's gonna listen because they're like, oh, they've I can't even remember what the stupid person, I'm sure you probably know, or you can look it up, that says, every conversation at some point, or every debate that's going nowhere, will end up at one side or the other calling the other side a Nazi. And people will actually use that to their defense when you say, hey, check it out, that seems to be like a fascist policy or something, or a Nazi tactic or whatever. And then that just throws it out the door right when you get to like the root of the potential problem, or just, in a regular discussion. I've had that happen and stuff. So it's ridiculous. Um, but yeah, speaking of the Nazi style stuff that's going on with these social things, because now there are international deals, so whatever. And it seems like the United States is anybody who holds on to those ideals, it's becoming a smaller and smaller island. And that's a scary thing, in my opinion. Like, I'm not pro, like, Mr. Republic, like, put up all these statues and stuff. Like, one part of me, when I see those statues ripped down, I'm like, I could give a shit. You know what I mean? I don't worship some tin monument. I don't give a shit about any of that. Not that I don't necessarily, I don't want to get into like the whole respect issue for it, but I'm not trying to like, whatever. Somebody said, I think it was Scott Adams, which I disagree with a lot of, none of these people, anybody I bring up, I'm not like straight ticket on nobody's ideas, but he said, can we just forget about these dead guys and move on with life? Like going forward, just whatever, let's just not worry about it. I think he might feel the same or similar as me on the statue thing where it's like, it's just irrelevant. But that comes back to the whole Trump thing where it's like, if you really dig in on defining the literal like politics that he supposedly represents, when you get into like the more conservative libertarianism, I guess. I haven't researched it in a while. Maybe a little bit of Tea Party overlap there, stuff like that, where it's specifically about, it's sort of like a nationalism kind of thing, which I'm not trying to judge it either way, but I'm just saying that's what it is. It's more of that nationalist angle of versus like maybe you could say against like a globalist angle, where the national angle is going to say, hey, we are a country, we are this republic, we have these leaders that got us here, the so-called forefathers, and we have pride and a flag and all that stuff. And that's the way it is, and that's why they have the Pledge of Allegiance and all that, because it's like this drony kind of religion thing. And it's not just America, it's every imposed political system, whether it's globalism or a city or maybe a state's a better example. That's one thing with like the Confederate flag, is a lot of people don't realize like that. Yeah, speaking of that, I have a thing up right here. And don't think just because this says like Tucker Carlson that I'm like a Tucker Carlson fan. Not at all. That guy's polarized. He's hard right. I wouldn't, or just say full right. I don't think he's like crazy right wing, but he's conservative and he sticks that way. And like, even if it means at the cost of squelching fairness and unbiasedness, when I watched him interview Mike Braun, Senator Mike Braun, who's somebody, I started paying more attention to politics than I have in the last 10, 20 years and stuff, because obviously, that's what's going on right now. That's one of the gauges. I don't know. I feel like maybe we should, or at least I should. So I start looking in, and don't think I support any of this stuff in this image either. I'm just about to talk about this. But anyway, Tucker Carlson was interviewing Senator Mike Braun, and he's somebody who, when I was watching like Senate hearings and stuff, not necessarily that I agree with him, but I like the way he talks. I think that he is well composed, and he's just, you know what I mean? When somebody's good at what they're doing, I don't care if they're Democrat, Republican, Independent, nonpartisan, whatever. I think you might have to be some kind of party to, you definitely have to get some lobbying money to get in there, it seems like. But anyway, he's just, if you want to hear a good argument for whatever he's supposedly backing or upholding, I would say talk to Mike Braun about it, even if you disagree, so that you can get that good, opposing viewpoint. So Tucker, he's been siding a lot with like, the blue side or whatever, the more of what in this polarized system, what the lefties, the Democrats are going for. And so Tucker had him on, and I thought, oh wow, this will be interesting. Good speaker with these like hot viewpoints and stuff. So Tucker starts ripping into him right in the interview. You can look it up, and probably end of June, early July or something, 2020, of course. And he's like, "What's going on?" Blah blah blah. And Mike Braun starts giving these really solid answers, not that I necessarily agree with them, but I'm like, hey, you got to admit the guy's thought it out. He is under attack from Tucker, and he's answering these questions very well. And Tucker is just being very rude, cutting him off, insulting him and stuff. At one point, Braun did get a little bit heated just for a second, and it's almost like, cool, you're a human. I would have totally hung up the call or something way earlier, but that just made me lose a lot of respect for Tucker Carlson. I mean, I wasn't like that overly respectful, but a lot of these conservative voices for like during this COVID thing have seemed to have more logic than the Democratic ones. Not Democratic, but Democrat ones that I've seen. So I'm nonpartisan. I don't vote, like I said. I don't participate in this crap. I know that all these people are backed by huge corporations that their lobbying power is far outreaches. I'm just not even going to get into that junk. But what I can do is I can speak about stuff. And if you feel like your vote counts, go vote. If you want to, get your hands in that mud or blood or whatever you want to think of it as, that's up to you. And that's why I'm putting my voice out there so that, if you want to speak for those who choose not to jump in this pond. But anyway, the whole thing with the LinkedIn thing, just to kind of wrap that up, is I can't control my data. I can't delete. I can't go in. I can't counter this thing, just to wrap this up, I can't log in and delete my data, which I could. We're supposed to have full control of our data. So what they did is I had posted some pictures of some Holocaust victims, some gruesome pictures. I mean, they weren't the most gruesome, and these people were alive because they were standing up. Um, but they just looked like skeletons with skin on them. And it was right after they had rescued, I imagine that some of them might not have even survived being rescued. And it was gross, but it was something to do with the Nazi concentration camps and all this biased, one-sided stuff for the most part, especially back then. Even these conservative voices weren't speaking up back then. Everybody was just on the boat with the whole COVID thing. And I was like, wait, red flags. We've got, for our evidence, we have China, right? And then after China, we have Italy, who was part of the Axis of Evil during the World Wars, if you remember that or studied history at all. So, yeah, people change and places change, but, it's a little bit of like a yellow flag, I'd say. Like, take some note of that. Like, these aren't exactly like, it's not like it went to the UK or something right away and we're like focusing on the UK. So, we've got like the Axis of Evil, for just whatever, for the sake of the conversation right now. And then you got China, hammer and sickle, for whatever you think about that, which everybody's notion of that's changing, which is kind of, like, it's just hard to say. This is where it takes a lot of independent research, and we need a lot of independent voices, I feel like. Like, the last thing we need is you go to a social media site like LinkedIn did day one of COVID. They're like, boom, they popped up a new box on the top right corner that had never been there, and it was like, get your COVID information here. And Twitter still does it to this day. And YouTube will wrap anything, I imagine they'll, if they don't just totally pull this down or ban it or whatever, they'll probably wrap this with like, oh, get your COVID facts. And it's like, okay, if they want to wrap it, frame it with, get COVID news through some stupid one-sided social media thing, like some Orwellian deal, go ahead. That's cool. That's it. That's as far as they should take it. But I should be allowed to speak on it. You know what I mean? I should be able to say, hey, bullshit, or whatever. And nobody should take my voice or any singular voice, whether it's a platform or a person or whatever kind of entity. That should not be the be all end all. This is all, life is theoretical. And our entire life cycle is theoretical. It's based on theory. Science is based on theory. Theories are supposedly the best things we have going, that supposedly there's some sort of consensus on, that just are waiting to be disproven or improved on. And so we should be able to throw darts at those things and whatever. And the best way to deal with bad speech, if there is such a thing, is more speech. It's not to close it off. We've learned that. That's definitely one of the things we've learned in America. That's there's a the word enlightenment really unpacks beyond whatever. But just to use the word enlightened in a very shallow sense, that not the Enlightenment really is a religious sort of movement, even if you want to say it's an atheist religious movement. Um, which I would argue that if you look into the facts, it might have that guise, but it's definitely a theist religious movement. But just to use the word in its simple sense of being enlightened, versus like leaning primarily towards dogma, religious dogma, institutionalized religious dogma, um, and going more for, what we witness ourselves and what we taste and feel ourselves and all that. So, and making our own determination. I've just lost my train of thought. I've gone off on so many tangents, I think. So, anyway, this is BS that I can't delete this junk. Sorry about losing my train of thought there. I'll try and can't hit rewind in real time in life and figure out where I was at. So this data, what I was talking about with like the concentration camp victims, I was basically had converted to kind of like a troll. I did tech stuff and I still do, and I'm a software programmer primarily, and so I do a lot of stuff like discussing that. And that's what I tried to stay on. But once these things get imposed on me, then I feel like that I have the need to speak up about it and say like, "Hey, back up." Like when people start pushing their politics on me, I didn't like to get political against big companies that were being like really virtue signalists back in the day on LinkedIn, like IBM and stuff, whoever, Microsoft, when they try and do their things like, "Oh, we're such," paint that perfect picture of themselves, like I would put little stupid trolly comments on that kind of stuff because it's like, screw that. You know what I mean? Like, give me a break. We know these corporations are not just like roses and whatever. There's a lot of Kool-Aid puddles under those, feeding those roses and stuff. So I would call that out. If that would be, I would say that's somewhat political. But as far as like on an individual basis, I was like, hey, to each their own, the golden rule kind of thing of just do unto others as you would like others to do unto you. And so it didn't matter if somebody was transsexual or non-binary or this race or that or anything. And but honestly, even whether they're anti-gun, pro-gun, any of that stuff. And like, anyway, I I don't know. I just this stuff is so crazy now. Like, what's going on here? So I can't delete my data. That's what it comes down to. And they stuck it at that it's left at that. So I did that thing where when they did that, I saw these people like, oh, they want to take people off and contact trace them and quarantine them and all this. And if they don't have their own bathroom, then they're going to have to get quarantined at a hotel or maybe these so-called FEMA camps or something, which even if those don't exist, they could be propped up in a minute. And that all gets really creepy, just like with the hospital thing during the lockdowns, which we're still in semi-hardcore lockdown, depending on where you're at to what degree. But when it was just full-on lockdowns, like hospitals weren't even allowed to do elective surgeries and all that stuff, which, by the way, is I don't see any of these people on the news. They have like people like Como. I don't even want to say that name. It's like, oh my God, give me a break. But they act like they're experts. These people are lifelong, like beyond lifelong politicians. You know what I mean? Like, give me a break. And they're like the last people we should believe. Like they should be trying to convince us of whatever, like they do, but we should always be questioning them because when you look at what interests are in play there, give me a break. Wow. But they're telling us that Man, I keep losing my train of thought. I start thinking about 1,000 things. There's like so many places I can go with this, which is what I plan to do with this channel. Um, but maybe I also plan to do some more focus stuff. And I thought, okay, I'll just do two things on this and take 20 minutes or something. But yeah, so I brought up the fact that it reminded me of like the concentration camps, because if you go back to Germany, it wasn't like all of a sudden World War II happened and then bam, overnight the Nazis were in constant, or not the Nazis, but the Nazis put the Jewish people, not the Jews, uh, into concentration camps. And it didn't work like that. There was roughly a 10-year buildup to that point, and that's what I think we're at right now with what's going on, with whatever's going on right now. And if you look, of course, it's the white conservative male, um, maybe a little bit older of a generation, like I don't know, randomly like mid 30s or something and later. They're really targeting that crowd, like as if all those people are guilty of everything, and it's trippy. So what had happened in the Nazi Germany situation was there was supposedly, this if you go back to like the 20s or the early 30s, they had done what they did with the Jews against the Germans themselves. Not the genocide per se, but they had rallied up this whole like the Jewish people really need to and sorry if I do say Jews, like I think that's a derogatory term, just like Jap was used during World War II by the United States. Jew and Jap are like abstractly synonymous in that sense. Some people have defended it and said, well, Jewish people even call themselves Jews. Yeah, well, you hear maybe a person of color call another person of color like, hey, and I'm just saying this in this context, but they'll say like, hey, nigga, you know what I mean? But do you think I'm gonna walk up and call a person of color that if I'm a white person or whatever? You know, like no, that's inappropriate, right? That term that they use like that came from a derogatory term that was used against their ancestors for generations. You know what I mean? So that's their thing. If they want to do that or whatever, and that's how they lean, that's their thing. But it's not our thing. And that's the way I feel with the Jewish thing too, is that we shouldn't be saying Jews. That's like using that term on a Jew, like on a Jewish people like that. But anyway, so there was a lot of build up to make the German people feel oppressed by the Jewish community before, in the early phases for like a whole decade. And that happened. And the Jewish people did dominate the economy. And, not that they needed to be exterminated or treated the way they did because of it, but there was a whole manufacturing of consent, as Noam Chomsky would say. And that happened. So by the time that the Germans started, just to say like Germans versus Jewish or whatever, but they were obviously all German citizens for the most part. But the Germans, or the so-called Aryans or whatever you want to say, or so-called Nazi party and all that, like they started to rally against that and be like, hey, we're going to stand up. We need to reclaim it, and it's nationalism. Not that, it was a different flavor than what we're seeing right now in the United States of nationalism, but it was nationalism. And it also was socialism. And that's why they called it the Nazi Party, because to say National Socialist in German, the Na was the beginning of nationalist in the German sense, and the Z was the beginning of the socialist in the German sense. And, whenever these things crop up, it's always a little bit different. You're never going to see the exact socialism that you did somewhere else or anything, but for the most part, at least abstractly, it's going to be pretty spot on. So that's what they combined. Instead of right now, I think what we're seeing is more of like a global socialism. So like a a globesy or something. But back then, that's what it was. And they even, if you look into the history of it, it was sort of an arbitrary name. Like they wanted to pick a name, so they created Nazi for that. So anyway, And that's what happened. So it felt natural for the German people to have this heated response, this polarized response, right? It's the divide and conquer type of a thing. So people felt like, hey, we've been beat up for 10 years, and then they spent the next 10 years trying to get unbeat up. And I'm not defending any of, I'm not saying, I'm not trying to, I'm just giving the history, the unbiased history, as unbiased as I can. These were the mentalities that the populations were put in. And they didn't, there was, like I said, so if you say in the early 30s that these so-called Germans, the non-Jewish Germans, started to take a stand, then, politically and all that, and started to have representation, they didn't immediately, like, just start killing Jewish people. They didn't have the solution. So it was called the question, the Jewish question. You can look it up, and please do. And definitely do an image search on that too, and you'll see a lot. I mean, it's hard to understand because it's in German if you're not fluent with that, but you can see there's this whole thing of like this derogatoriness, which at least in America, I would say I'm imagining probably globally to some extent that the white conservative kind of male vibe, but just you know you could go with the Jewish person or whatever, and they're just building up, breeding this hate towards them like they're just trash. That's what they did. And then they just acted like it was this question, and what do we do? So once they realized they had enough political traction and people have been desensitized enough, a lot like what they're doing with COVID and stuff like that around that, then they could step it up a little bit. Like right now we're in the era of a lot of places are mandating masks. A lot of states are mandating masks. They of course did it with the workers right away, and now they're doing it with regular citizens in any public spaces and stuff in a lot of places, especially blue states, right? And man, that's a whole nother thing. But anyway, then finally they ended up at the so-called quote unquote final solution with the Jewish people. Look it up. There's a whole Wikipedia page about it, at which, at some point, Wikipedia, in my opinion, if you compare that to the Orwellian 1984, that's the quote unquote Ministry of Truth. So they get all the stuff online and then they're going to change it, and it's already happening. It's already leaning towards a really hard left bias. And in all honesty, I consider myself a full left, and I am. In my heart, I'm, culturally in my heart and even fiscally in my heart, I'm completely liberal. Like, so this has been a jagged pill for me to like chew. I can't swallow this pill. I got to chew it up. Like, it's crazy. But I've come to realize, it's back to the same thing where it's like I'm not polarized. I'm not just conservative or just liberal or any of those things. Like, it depends on what the topic is, and I'm imagine you could, even if you split open that topic and it's like it's not even, the topic itself isn't polarized, so it's if, whatever the hot topics are. But the final solution thing anyway, they that's when they started exterminating, doing the genocide against Jewish and other dissenters, and I've heard blacks, people of color. I don't like to say blacks. Blacks, to me, blacks in like a decade or two is going to be like using the word Negro 50 years ago or something, or I guess more than 50 years ago now maybe, but uh, like if you look in the 1900s, like the first half of the 1900s at least, that they said the word Negro all the time, and now if people say that, it's like, whoa, it's kind of weird, right? And that's the way I'm feeling that vibe with the term blacks. It's just like, it's bizarre. What they really, what so-called black people really are, and then there's like, oh, what do you call them? African Americans, and then a lot of people get offended by that because they're like, no, check it out. I'm full American. I was born here. If I wanted to go back to Africa, I would, right? Um, there's a lot of people of color that are well aware of like all sorts of facts. There's natives that respect Americans in America, like hardcore natives that if you look up like the Rushmore thing where Trump just went to do the 4th of July thing, which is actually a solstice celebration. We're so stuck in our narrow-mindedness that we think that's like an American holiday, and even the word holiday is just slurred version of the word holy day. You know, it's like same thing with the Protestant groups. That's really the word Protestant, but they blur that by, oh, they're Protestants. And it's like, Protestant? Who talks like that? They're Protestants. But anyway, um, a lot of these groups, they're realistic. They're intelligent and they're realistic. You know, a lot of these cultural groups or communities and what have you. And that's a thing that gets just glazed over in the media and crap like that, to where most times, a lot of times. But anyway, they blocked the road. There was a protest right before Trump's speech, so many hours before his speech, and there were Native Americans predominantly there blocking the road, but they were actually being very peaceful people and that type of a thing. That's the way that a lot of the Native American communities that have managed to survive and have any voice did so, because there was a lot of retaliation against any sort of groups like that that were aggressive, obviously. But those groups, they're very peaceful, very intelligent, and all that. And they were having one of those peaceful and intelligent protests more, in my opinion. And I don't agree with the blocking the roads, whether it was, Biden going to make a speech or Trump or, the devil itself or whatever. Like, I believe in free speech. That's why I haven't left this country, no matter how many times I said I would in the distant past, especially during the Bush years. But it's just that's what it is. We got the right to do that, and as soon as we start nitpicking on that and being like, oh no, everybody but Trump or something, then all of a sudden it's going to be like everybody but you, and then only the party, to get back to that Orwellian thing. So anyway, but there were some people, supposedly like a dozen or so people, that were not Native American, and they were being radical. And if you go and dig into any of these protests where there is something radical going on, it's generally people that are more pale-skinned for the most part, and they're going in and radicalizing these protests and stuff. And what disgusts me about that is it's like, yeah, I understand some people think that violence is the only answer and stuff. Um, but that doesn't seem to work. It really doesn't, and I really don't think it is the only answer personally, but you're entitled to your opinion if that's what you think. And I think that kind of violates the golden rule. But I guess if you're willing to take violence from somebody else back on you, then have fun with all that. I don't, and the premise that building stuff on violence, like fight a war for peace, really? I mean, do you think that's really going to happen? It doesn't work out that way because of a lot of things. I mean, when you really look into the math into it about what's going on there, it's like you live by the sword, you die by the sword, and it just, I can see how it seems like it. Like, I've looked into the original Black Panther movement and stuff, and there was a lot of good and bad that came with that. I would say even more good, but they ultimately had this sort of that radical edge that, and I had to wonder if that was coming from the outside too, because there was a lot of like literally there was a lot of African influence in there from groups on the outside that were feeding into them, because I think they felt like at a certain point that they needed that funding, they needed that support and stuff, and that took away from the heart of the real movement, the real, because the original Black Panther Party, if you look at them and take away that sort of external influence, it's like, is there even a better system than that? Like, that was cool, like really cool on so many levels, and I think that's why they got so much heat, was because, and plus they were people of color during the, like, this was right at the height of the climax of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and all that kind of stuff, like that it was, I can't even imagine being around back then. That's when stuff would have made so much more sense to me. Like, I kind of almost am glad I wasn't, because I think I would have got sucked into like certain political ideologies, that thinking that I agreed with them maybe more than I did, or not seeing the forest for the trees kind of thing. But anyway, get back a little bit more on track. So I posted with the COVID thing, I was seeing this whole idea of like sending people off to camps, basically, sometime in the future, and until, the quote unquote infected and all this. And literally, people like Bill Gates are even using the phrase final solution. I mean, give me a break. And so I posted some pictures, and like I said, I was already a troll on LinkedIn, and that was part of my thing. There's like, I don't know if it's called the Bad Influence, there's the Onion, there's places like that, and they do their thing, and it's insultive, but it's humor or whatever, it's their thing. I had carved out my thing, legitimately, I felt like, you know what I mean? And if people don't like it, they were welcome, more than welcome to block me, and or speak out against me, or both, whatever. And I had posted some people who were rescued from the concentration camp. I posted other controversial stuff as well, but this was like one of the final things I think that was posted. And I said, hey, here's some COVID people that uh, went and got their treatment and say they're feeling much better now, something along those lines. And it was, on one hand, you could take it as almost humor. I wouldn't describe it as like, I'm not trying to get people to like slap their knee and laugh kind of thing at all. It's sort of to be like, whoa, you know what I mean? Like, whoa, like that feeling that you probably think, if you can paint that picture of what I just, that caption over that image. It's like, that's not a good feeling. I'm not trying to make people's day with that. I'm trying to stir up a little bit of controversy on it, because it's like, hey, look what happened to the last people that this system was imposed on. This, abstractly, this type of a system was imposed on. It didn't turn out well. You know what I mean? And it's all about, it's for their safety. If you look that up, for their safety in German, um, or for their protection. The word can translate several ways, but those were the terms that they were using, which is what they're doing with the masks now. Is they're saying, "Hey, those masks aren't for you. Those are for these vulnerable populations until there's supposedly a vaccine." Um, but anyway, that's what it was left at. It was left at, that was like my last post. So now LinkedIn has totally blocked that profile as far as I can tell. But for a long time, or not a long time, for some amount of months, I could go in, I created another account, and I could look at my old account. I don't think you could see it from a plain public search engine. I think you had to have a LinkedIn account, but you could still go look at my profile. The profile that I was no longer allowed to touch. I couldn't delete my data, couldn't download it, nothing. Now, people with LinkedIn accounts, which is tons of people, could still go in and look. So they effectively froze my account at the supposedly worst point in time, what they would consider the worst point in time. That's not what I really thought I wanted my entire LinkedIn account to be representative of. But in hindsight, I was like, hey, you know what? Obviously, I was trying to make a point, and now they've just froze my account right at that point. So there it is. Um, yeah, that's my big pet peeve with that whole thing, is like, what's going on there? They're not fulfilling this whole obligation that they have to let people control their data, and they're getting away with it. And people like Trump aren't tightening down the screws. And I shouldn't even pick on Trump, because he's the only one with the screwdriver doing anything, it seems like, about this crap. At least to my knowledge of what's floating on the surface. But it should be more people besides just him. I mean, the president, honestly, is almost a joke. It's just like veto power against Congress, right? I mean, and some other stuff. But I don't think we should pit so much into that, like so much of an expectation. In all reality, we really should have a president for each major party that can, like, speak up with just that veto power. I think. And people think like, oh, well, nothing will pass. Good. Good. We don't need new laws every other day. Like seriously, and it's not even every other day. It's like like almost every day sometimes. Um, like we don't need that much legislation. It's just not necessary. Like laws are not an answer. Laws are like bubblegum and the cracks in the dam kind of thing. And it's just that's what I feel like. I remember when Congress shut down in the 90s, and I want to say it was for like a month or more. I can't remember. But nothing happened. No big deal. You know what I mean? The lobbyists couldn't get their crap through. Like, oh well. And I mean, yeah, obviously the wheels got to turn, but it's just there's a lot of unnecessary BS and a lot of this stuff that goes through. I've said it before, like the thing that drives me the most nuts and scares me the most is when I hear a bipartisan bill, because that's just, oh man, how gross. That's just where they basically both agree to allow the other party just to tack on as much crap as they can into those bills, you know. I can't think of I haven't researched a lot of specific bills in the last so many years, but so I'm just making this up hypothetically, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's an exact scenario, but something to do with like, you know, this deforestation in the same bill as something to do with like nuclear weapons or something. Like they're just it's like, okay, we don't really agree with your you know, one side says we don't agree with the other side, but, you know, if you'll let us do this tack on, then we'll, you know, it's sort of like that. And that's more or less what a bipartisan effort seems to be. It's just, it's nothing about the people. It's like, oh, wow, now these lobbied groups get to push all their crap through. So, anyway, that's all I'm going to say about this junk. But then right here, this is something I got to wonder about. Because these flags right here, a lot of people don't realize it's like, yeah, you often see them too often to be properly represented right next to something like this. You know what I mean? You see, these are the so-called battle flags, the Confederate flags, the, you know, in a more normal context, the flag of Southern pride. People say, oh, that's representative of the Civil War. Excuse me. And to some degree, to a heavy degree, that's very true. As far as I know, this flag was developed during that time period, but it's also like a state flag. You know, you could say a state flag represents running, like a California state flag or something represents running Mexicans out of California. You know, there could be that argument made, but at the same time also it's a state flag, right? So this flag is the Southern flag. So I'm just trying to give this information unbiased. I really don't care about this flag. Like it means nothing to me. Like none of these flags mean anything to me. They mean something to these people, you know, and that's what I'm trying to maybe convey a little bit. So if you ignore the flag in the middle, which I'm going to get to in a second, these are Southern pride flags. You know what I mean? They represent the southern belt of states and that sort of a thing in general, not in this context per se, but like when you saw the protesters at the Michigan State Capitol with those flags, those people were not racist. As far as I could see, even the left news watching that kind of stuff, they could not show those people being racist. I have seen people with the Confederate flag being very racist. Don't get me wrong, being extremely racist. I have seen that. The KKK will sport this flag. That being said, one thing to take note of is this is a Democrat flag. You know what I mean? The Democrat Party, this, they were for the South. You know, those, nothing's really changed in that sense. Like, that's one thing that's trippy that I didn't even realize till this year, going in and investigating a lot of this, like really digging under the surface. Like, hey, let's try and really dig in and get the full spectrum of what's going on here. Um, the Democrats were pro-slavery, hardcore pro-slavery, 100% pro-slavery, which blew my mind, right? I mean, that's like, I thought they're the anti-slavery party. I thought they're the civil liberties party. Well, Martin Luther King Jr. was an independent, for one thing. Malcolm X was a conservative. The Black Panthers were socialists, but they didn't think they didn't want the Democrat. They wanted to overthrow the whole system. Honestly, in a somewhat planned out and thought out manner, but they weren't Democrats, but they were so-called lefties. And but yeah, the Democrats were have been hardcore. If you dig into the history on it, the Republican Party was created in opposition to the Democrat Party, and the Democrat Party was basically created to uphold slavery and to oppress, the Negroes, the blacks. Like that's what it was for. Look at all the votes on all those amendments. I've talked to people who, and I considered myself like, I was like, there's no way I'd ever say that I was like a conservative or anything like that. It's like, yeah, I do some traditional stuff. Some very, very specific, very niche tradition. Um, I think I have a thing for, but not tradition for the sake of tradition. I've always thought tradition for the sake of tradition is pure evil. I've had that thrown when people start losing arguments, conservatives with me and stuff, that they'll say it's tradition for the sake of tradition, and it's like, whoa, dude, like what? Where are you going with that? That tradition for the sake of tradition means tradition for nothing other than the fact that it's been those wheels have been turning in that direction for so long. You're just going to keep them turning, and that's dangerous. And in that sense, I think those flags are very scary because then it's like that type of a thing. But anyway, to deal with this picture right here, um, yeah, look up all that stuff with the Democrats and how they voted on those amendments to end slavery and to give civil rights. It's zero Democrat vote. It's freaking zero. You know what I mean? It's all Republicans, and I'm not a Republican, but that's just a fact. It and you go in and look at who the first Negro black people to hold office and to like hold any positions of power and stuff, they were Republicans. They were not Democrats. Democrats were late into the game, sometimes over 100 years late into the game before the first so-called black people were taken holding positions of power with them. And when you look at it, what's scary right now too is the Green New Deal that they're trying to pass all this stuff under the guise of climate change. Because no matter what you think about COVID, and you think there's some polarity going on there, 99% of people are backing the idea of climate change, right? Which I'm not trying to get into right this second too much, but they want to pass the Green New Deal, which is effectively the FDR New Deal, Franklin Delano Roosevelt New Deal from World War II era. Um, it's basically that plus some quote unquote green stuff, right? And the if you take what I'm saying about the whole Democrat idea and dig into that, you're going to land at FDR as like this central pin of things and his New Deal, his so-called New Deal. FDR served 4 terms as a president, by the way. He was a Democrat. He served 4 freaking terms. He served the entire World War II era. And guess what? World War II ended when he died. So those are some interesting things to really dig into. And he did the New Deal, among tons of other stuff, but the New Deal was this pivot point, and that's where a lot of the Negro black population started to vote Democrat. That was the whole thing. Before that, they were actually forced to vote Democrat, like at gunpoint and stuff. You can look up the political stuff on that. But as far as the community as a whole, so-called community as a whole back then, voting Democrat, that's where it was basically the welfare state was really created then. And it's understandable. These people, I mean, not only them, there were a lot of oppressed whites and all sorts of groups. Um, but especially for them, they were so oppressed. They still didn't even have voting rights, to my knowledge. Then, the civil rights movement was still decades away. Like, it's ridiculous. But they wanted to have this like needy. They wanted to create this oppressed, needy community and then serve them. And so that's what they did with that. And that's why, all of a sudden from having the Negro black community back then going from being Republicans and conservatives, which if you dig into a lot of the so-called black community culture, it's very conservative. You know what I mean? It's very tradition based. Um, to whatever level you want to think of it as. If you want to get like whatever, whether or not you want to just say like, oh, let's be real general. Let's be like let's say that like, oh, black people like barbecues. You know what I mean? I don't think that's offensive. I think I like when I'm a vegan, but I still barbecue very occasionally, but because it's not like such a big deal anymore. But when I was a meat eater, a very carnivorous meat eater, and I loved it, um, I love barbecuing. It's like, well, is there a better way to cook meat? I don't think so. But anyway, um, but let's just say that like that's what black people like to do, or people of color, people of the black community, they like to do. That's 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 a conservative value right there. That's tradition, and that's like there's probably even people of color that could care less about a barbecue that just do it because it's so traditional. Just like you might celebrate Christmas or something, um, or whatever particular so-called holiday that you might celebrate, just Fourth of July or whatever. It's because it's tradition. People do it. So anyway, the thing that really taints this picture in front of us here, I'm just going to scoot back to this, is this swastika, this Nazi swastika right in here, left pointing. This is actually a symbol of sun worship. If you really break down, um, anybody who knows about symbolism, esoteric stuff, mysticism, which is really what all this is based on. That's even here with the 13 pentagrams across here. You can really dig into this stuff, and you might think, oh, whatever, this guy's going too deep. Good, shut me off. You're free to do so. Block me. Just whatever. Maybe consider an opposing voice, or I wouldn't even say I'm opposing. Just consider some unbiased information coming through and do the research for yourself. And if you think I'm full of shit, then post a comment saying so. But and then you got a serpent on this flag. Like, if you really want to break it down. So, but anyway, trying to stick with this center thing that's in the center of this picture specifically. This picture's, there's also a right pointing swastika. Depending on how you want to say it or whatever, I'm just going to call them all swastikas. And the right one, this one's the one it's sort of like if you dig into the United States, the eagle, which is really a lot more representative of a phoenix if you look at its style, but it's been turned into an eagle. And then in its claws, it has the arrows in one hand, which symbolize war. I'm not making it up. It's a known fact. You can look it up for yourself. And then in the other hand, in the other paw, it's got the other claw, it's got olive branch, which symbolizes peace. And that's the left, right, war, peace thing. That's the way the duality of a lot of symbols are. And also they do symbols with 7 meanings. And the seventh, the furthest out, the newest meanings, like the so-called peace sign and stuff like that, the forks, right? It's offensive in a lot of other areas. And, that even gets into Hinduism and the Vedics and stuff like that. So those symbols come from places, you know what I mean? And then people will tell you, oh, this is what it means or whatever, and right now we have a really negative view, I'd say, of this symbol because in the last 100 years what it was used for. But 100 years before that, the masses, I mean, there's a lot of people who still feel probably the same exact way about the symbol even 100 years before because they knew the real meaning behind it, in my opinion. But you can literally go back 100 years, literally 1920, and punch in like 1920 Christmas card, and there'll be swastikas on it in America because it was a symbol of sun worship. And Christmas time is literally, that's the winter solstice when the sun goes from the days become the shortest, and then immediately after the solstice, right, they become longer and longer. So it's a rebirth of the quote unquote sun. So that's really what Christmas is about. And I'm not saying that means that the Bible's not true or something like that, but they know that the messianic figure in the Bible was most likely not born on that date. They just wanted to Christianize, so-called Christianize those holidays. And with the Roman Empire, the they had the universal state religion. All the global known world empires had a state religion. A lot like North Korea does, where you worship the founders of the state and stuff like that. Um, China sort of has like a little bit colder, drier version of that, I'd say, but that's a common thing from the past. So anyway, that yeah, the Roman Empire had that state. Where was I going with that? With the Roman Empire? Anyway, I kind of forgot where I was going with that. That definitely unfolds. Speaking of unfolding, you see all these creases in this flag? You can tell that unlike these flags that were there's one, this one has creases too. I didn't notice that at first. So both of these two flags look like they were just purchased. This flag looks like, yeah, it was probably hanging on his wall. Same thing with this one. These people probably had these flags for years. They all actually look polyester. Um, but this one especially, like this one looks kind of new, but it doesn't look like brand new today, but maybe like, brand new this year for sure. Maybe this month, or that month whenever the picture was taken. But this one is brand spanking new, you know. So that makes me wonder, is this guy planted in the crowd? Because that is a known thing to happen, to where these people might be going along with these don't tread on me stuff, and then this guy just runs in. This is hypothetical. I don't know. I wasn't there. Runs in, slips in, and does this whole thing, you know. But when you look at this guy's shield over here, there's a phoenix. That's the phoenix. Tell me that doesn't look like the eagle. You know what I mean? It's symbolism. But that's a possibility. And either way, this guy's tainting the whole situation. It's like, dude, what are you doing? Um, I don't know. Usually when I see this flag, and it could be the media, but it's usually people spitting and cussing and getting pissed off when they do come out, and you often will see these southern flags too alongside of it. But just because this flag's next to that one doesn't necessarily make this flag that one. It's just saying, hey, they got their southern pride, and otherwise this guy wouldn't need to bring this flag because it's like, oh, I'm covered by this symbology, right? Um, so that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But when you see the protests that don't have these crazy looking phoenixes and don't have these Swazis flying, but do have the Southern Pride flag, and all the people are not spitting and cussing, and they're being very kind, even and especially to people of color, though, how can those people be hated on? And then 1.2 with the two flags, what if this was an American flag and what if this was a Confederate flag? Does that make the American flag automatically a symbol of hate? I don't think so, So it's like, anyway, that's just a whole thing to dig into. There are lots of images. You can punch in, like, I don't know what a good search term might be, but, black people, Confederate flag. Black people holding Confederate flag. You can punch that into an image search, and you will find tons of, I mean, countless people of color that support the Confederate flag. I'm gonna uh let's see here if I go people of color Confederate flag. That might be too much of a. So you think I'm kidding? You know what I mean? Like, there are people of color supporting that. There were people of color fighting on the Civil War on that side too, but I'm not trying to get into all that. Um, you know what I mean? There are definitely people of color. Look on their shirt. They're saying, hey, and these people are intelligent. Don't even think, oh, they're stupid, da da da, stuff like that. These people are very intelligent. Look at this. What do you see right there? Oh, I thought I saw a person of color holding it in that image too. But right there, you don't see. At least you don't see any Nazi flags. These people are generally very peaceful protesters, even when they pack guns. And that's another thing too. That whole thing, that argument with the Black Panthers state capital. You think these white guys didn't learn it from the black people? Give me a break. What's this? Back in the black and white days, shoddy in the state capital. And this ain't Michigan as far as I know. This is Sacramento. You know what I mean? This is real talk right here. These guys went up there intelligent, peaceful, and went in there because of brutality, because of police brutality. You know what the original Panthers did was they started their own patrol of the streets, and they would drive around with a scanner, and then once they heard that the police were harassing, not necessarily harassing, but that they were going to do an arrest or whatever type of thing with a person of color, with the so-called Negro, then they would go and stand their distance with their arms at their side, and they would watch and make sure that those police did not brutalize. Because back then it was very polar. You had 99% white police, you know. So, and today, yeah, in a lot of areas it still is very polar. But look, these people were armed at the state capitol. You know what I mean? Shoddy, Boombody, state capitol buildings. I'm pretty sure, or it's a university protest, but I'm pretty sure that should be state capitol too. Right there, right in front of the white cops. And these were segregation generation. This is right at plus or minus civil rights. This was the civil rights movement. And you could see that looks like it might be an assault rifle there. And they're well trained. They know how to handle these weapons. You can see this is sort of like a hunter carry right here, a very safe carry. They're even with the new Black Panthers, which the original Black Panthers often speak out against, because whatever, even the new Black Panthers I've seen video footage and they handle their guns in a very trained way. So you can see right here, they weren't messing around. They went and stormed the Capitol. So don't think those Confederate white people, I call them Confederates, but don't think that, like all the arguments that like, oh, if a black person would have done that, go back to the day. Go back and tell me these black people were not doing this at the height. You know what I mean? This was way more radical than some white dude, some, retired white guy going and doing it today. This was way more radical back then. These cops and so many groups were looking for ways to off these people. And these people wanted to overthrow the system too. And I'm not saying, like, I'm not trying to bag on anybody either way. But what I'm saying is these people were radical. The people who went into the state capitol were trying to uphold the existing system. They weren't trying to overthrow it. They were saying, hey, look, government tyranny creeping in, whoop-de-whoop, right? These people are straight saying government's tyrannical, period, right? More or less. So I'm just saying, don't think this was cherry on top at all. This was serious business. But they were very smart, which honestly, like, the Trump campaigns had to, I wouldn't say the campaign's kind of stupidish, but they've had to be, there is a whole sort of populism in there. And that's what trips me out too, is that guy's kind of for the masses. I mean, yeah, he's got one foot in that Republican Party all the way, that's like dragging along those corporate special interests. Like, here comes Bayer Corporation. Guess what? Bayer bought Monsanto. So I think that says it right there. And then if you go back to like the Spanish flu in 1918 era, which by the way I called out before anybody for the record, that once this COVID crap started happening, I was like, whoa, look at World War I era, pre-World War I era, whatever. Like, this was same thing all over again. And guess what company was in there? Bayer and their crap. And just like how the intubation and the respirators are now blamed for killing most of the people, Bayer, there was a lot of controversy around back in the day that Bayer was using their medications to increase people's symptoms, pump them up and kill them. You know what I mean? Like, it was crazy. So anyway, that's just to show. There's one of the papers that the Capitol is invaded. Whoop-de-whoop. If it bleeds, it leads. Supposedly, right? It was horrible what they did to this group. Like, I can't remember the guy's name. The really charismatic guy that they just went and slaughtered in his bed. That was disgusting when the FBI did that. There was one shot fired from the Panthers, and that was by accident because they kicked in the door on a guy and his gun dropped and hit the ground and went off, and then they went in with Tommy guns and just, it's disgusting. Disgusting. And they wanted to, you can look it up yourself. Hoover wanted to get rid of the Messiah, a quote unquote Messiah figure from Rising. And they thought, oh, this dude with the dimples in his cheeks and that big old bright smile and all that intelligence, they couldn't have that. So they wiped him out right along with Martin Luther King. I punched in people if I pit, just some, I don't like to say blacks, but. And all that stuff with like the Uncle Ben's rice and Aunt Jemima, it's like, give me a break. For one, those products are crap. Right here. Here's one I've seen before for sure. I ain't coming down. Really? Really? That's a racist flag? Are these guys Uncle Tom's? Are you kidding me? Um, yeah, that, like Aunt Jemima, all that crap, that's all GMO'd sugar ass crap anyway. You know what I mean? If anything, there shouldn't be a black person on there because that's saying that, that they want their face on that kind of crap. You know what I mean? Pit it on some real maple syrup, some real like dark AAA grade maple syrup, because the Aunt Jemima's crap anyway. You shouldn't be buying that stuff. But the whole politics behind it is just like, I don't know. White guilt, black genocide, huh? I mean, these guys are protesting with Civil War era hat on too. White guilt equals black genocide, passing right by each other. I'm always leery of like printed signs. I'm glad that with the more recent protests, there's a lot more, it seems like a lot more really organic, grassrootsy kind of vibe. But for so long during my lifetime, it's been like these kinds of flags, or not flags, but signs where I just feel like you can tell that there were so many choreographed protests too. I mean, it's countless. Don't think I'm kidding. It's countless people of color. What's this? What's this? Whoa! Oh, wow. Give me a break. Wow, how appropriate right here. That should be on the cover of like World News or something. It just shows. Wow. Yeah, so anyway, screw all this. Screw all that whole, I don't know. These people are totally entitled to peaceful protest. Like, I got their back on that. Like, you know what I mean? Even if I'm totally against it, which I'm not for any of the symbolism on any of these flags. Any of them. Um, but this one, that's a symbol of sun worship. You can go look, swastika. Like, I probably spelled that wrong. But yeah, you can go to the Wikipedia page and dig in. Be careful though with Wikipedia, because more and more every day that's getting biased. You can see there's two different directions. There's this left pointing one, and then there's this right pointing one. So this left pointing one's going to be like the arrows in the phoenix hand, and then this right pointing one is sort of representative of the olive branch. Um, but yeah, look at that. Look at that left pointing. You know what I mean? Maybe I've got it backwards for which one means what, but who knows? Also, another thing to do with this Buddha statue, these are Greco-Roman statues. They aren't Eastern statues. All of this Buddha, every one of these statues we're seeing right here is designed in Greece, or maybe just outside of Greece or something, but it's designed by white people, okay? Look it up. Swastikas everywhere. Okay, I'm going to look up those cards. Swastika Christmas card American. Just to make sure we get the American versions. So there you see, Merry Christmas with the swastika in America. Okay, this is not Nazi Germany, and this is probably 1910 or something like that. Like um, you can see it right facing. They're all right facing now because the right facing's the good side, right? Happy times, sun being reborn. See it? So, not making this shit up. It's for real. Right facing. There's the Phoenix style eagle. This looks very Germanic, but it's still the right facing one, like a Christmas. Yeah, Third Reich, about the Third Reich on Pinterest. So this would be probably a German Christmas card. This wreath right here, you could really dissect that symbology two ways with this going on. If it's broken, if these were broken, then they could be more of like Hellenistic bands, which it's not on the zoom in. I can tell for sure it's a wreath. But this wreath right here, this represents in symbology, if you dig back into it, don't take my word for it, that's a vagina. That's what that symbolizes. So, I'm not necessarily saying anything good. Okay, here's the bands, I think more of like, these would be the so-called Hellenistic bands maybe, but that looks very wreathy too. But if you have just the two, the bands broken in the middle, that represents the Roman Empire type of thing, like the Greek religion, more like that type of a thing. But yeah, this represents a phoenix, all all right facing for the Christmas, which they say means Christ. Right here, they're doing Aryan salute. This Aryan salute, same thing as a swastika. It predates Nazi Germany. It's called the Roman salute, technically. It was the salute of the Roman Empire. The thing with Nazi Germany is they were trying to bring back the Roman Empire. That's why they have this sun symbol, you know, all that stuff. Ooh, right there, that's like a Naziized one, but it's going to the right, which is rare, right? Unless I've got things backwards. Um, yeah, that Aryan salute, which they did in America too. They did that in America up through World War II. It was called the Bellamy Salute. Bellamy, I don't know how to spell it. Salute. Because what Bill Bellamy, no, I'm just kidding. What the Bellamy guy did was he added it to, it was called the Bellamy Salute specifically when it was part of the Pledge of Allegiance. And that was before the In God We Trust stuff that they packed in. It's kind of like they replaced it with the In God We, Under God thing or whatever. But the Bellamy Salute was where they would have the kids would start saying the Pledge of Allegiance, and then, I mean, see, there it is with an American flag. You see all these kids, they're sticking their arm out, and there's a kid holding the American flag in the front of the classroom, and they're all saluting it like that. Um, so that specifically is the Bellamy salute, right? But really, it's the Aryan salute. Or excuse me, it was called the Aryan salute in the World War II Nazi Germany era, but it's the Roman salute for the Roman Empire. And because the United States, oh shit, is, one of those crumbled pieces of the Roman Empire, which never technically fell. It just sort of like fell down, but it didn't die. And that's what I think we're seeing a resurgence of, is that, there they are. They're all definitely doing that towards an American flag. You can see there, right? And the only reason that they stopped doing it was because of the Nazi Germany thing. That's what got him to stop putting the swastika on the Christmas cards. That's what stopped it. And I'm not condoning any of this or anything. I'm just trying to show the facts. This is history. I'm just showing it as it was. I'm not saying anything, any kind of like direction with that. I'm just saying, wake up, study the full history. Don't get caught in these little tiny bubble loops. Like, go back and look at the full spectrum of what's going on. Um, I mean, it's a trip. Like if you look at like World Health Organization, right? Some people think, oh, the World Health Organization, like I did for a long time. I thought the UN are good guys. Like why? There's nothing. There can't be anything wrong with them. They were right when Bush was wrong and all that crap. Like, um, But when you break into this stuff, then you see this is emblem of the United Nations, the UN. This is a flat Earth right here, which is, oh man, this is going to be like some of the stuff I'm going to get into later on and other times. But some people argue, oh, da da da, whatever. You're welcome to argue either way on it. But the fact is, that's a flat Earth. I'm not saying that the Earth's flat. I'm not even necessarily saying it's round, but I believe it's round. Or, some sort of spheric. It's closer to a sphere than it is to a disc. That's what I'm saying. That's what I believe. Anybody can believe whatever they want. But one thing too is they've got so many so-called Bible believers, like these people who think, I'm not saying the Bible's wrong, but the English Bible is very well tainted with a lot of BS, and they are steering a lot of these believers of these English Bibles that are more or less read on it. Maybe the hardest core people you're going to find are the so-called like KJV only Baptists or something, and even they're missing a lot of their own religious text. Uh, but anyway, I've ran into people who are, you know, they they're very scholarly to up into a point, and then they hit a wall, and they're happy with that wall. And these are the same people that are like, hey, look at this flat Earth crap, and it's like I dug into it. I had to, It's like how can I just say, oh, da da da? You got to consider it. So I wasn't ever going out preaching that there was a flat Earth or anything, but I mean, I was almost immediately able to. I mean, I was immediately able to discern that it was BS, but in my opinion. But anyway, what you have here is a flat Earth with the Hellenistic bands. You see that? That is very Greco-Roman. I'll just punch in Greco-Roman. Greco-Roman. And then we'll go to the Greco-Roman world and see if they offer us some imagery. Maybe Greco-Roman mysteries might. I mean, it's there. Once you find the right rabbit hole, you're there. There's tons. Wikipedia, they've had to dissect their pages so much on those. Like, I could, to this day, probably go find Greco-Roman pages that I haven't seen, and I've seen a lot of them. Maybe Greco and Roman is the wrong thing to put in. But, I mean, anybody who knows that Greco bands, maybe that will. Or like, okay, here's just a quick manual way. So we can do Hellenistic. It's two L's, I think. So there we're definitely, Hellenistic is basically how you say like Greek, right? I'm sure you could say there's more to it than that. I've spelt that wrong too, so let's correct the spelling on it. Let's go here to the Hellenistic period, which is still more or less to this day. Oh, come on. It feels like this is everywhere. Hellenistic bands. So there you go. There's one of them right there. Like, I don't know. I'm gonna have to find some better examples. I feel like, if I'm trying to win anybody over or anything, then I'm not doing a very good job at it. But I don't think I'm construing, making nothing contrived about saying that those bands are the Hellenistic bands. People would wear them on their heads. I mean, there's probably statues in here of people wearing them. Must be Zeus. The Vatican Museum and his sons. Hellenistic. That's the thing with the Vatican too, is like that's on a pagan hill, and like uh it kind of exposes all this stuff that it's pagan. That's with the Universal Church of Rome, that's kind of what I was getting at, is it was a pagan church, and they had their ideas, and then once they, in basically 300 plus AD, they decided to Christianize and make that the which technically they were always quote unquote Christian. The term Christian began being applied to followers of the biblical Messiah during the 300 ADs, maybe arguably like 250 AD or something, but um, that that term Christian is not a biblical word. You will see it in an English Bible because that's used as the term, but that's just one of the ways that they've changed that over. So if you go, what would be Strong's, which is itself tainted, but Strong's Christ. So Strong's is a concordance and all sorts of stuff like that. So you come in here for Strong's and you find this word Christos, which, Christ is basically like the westernized, Americanized way of saying Christos. So anyway, you can see right here it's rendered like in this New American Standard, the Messiah, but in the KJV, it's rendered Christ. But if you look up what an actual literal Greek Christ is it's basically like an interpreter of an oracle. It's not like a messianic type of thing. A Messiah is a different thing. So what they're saying effectively is that this Iesus, which is really the way you say the name that's rendered in there, because there was no J in English when this Bible was translated, when all these earlier English Bibles were translated, it was Iesous, and that means Iesus means hail Zeus. And because Zeus was the most high god of the Greek religion, that they were, that's how they fit this. They basically fit everything into the Greek religion. They like merged the two together and said, the Bible itself for the most part is still the text itself is still a lot closer to the Shemitic text. It's not it hasn't been changed on the whole to be Greek, but just the most important terms have, like this, like Christ. So it really should be Messiah, because what they did with the Septuagint, which was 300 BC, not 80, BC. I don't say BCE and Common Era and all that crap, because that's ridiculous. That they're going to take an abbreviation, that AD and BC, and so-called, a few scientists supposedly were like, yeah, we feel like that's like shoehorning in this theology on us, and we don't like doing it. It's like, oh, really? Well, what are the names of the days of the week? Why don't we change those? Weekday names. Why don't we change these? Tell me this is not shoehorning in theology. Like, boom. Here's what the days of the week are named after these Greek deities right here. There's Zeus, I'm pretty sure. So if you go in here, Hellenistic astrology, boom. Here we go. Sunday, Dia Solis, Helos, sun. It's sun worship. That's why that is their first day of the week, right? Monday, Luna, moon. Mon was another way to say moon. Moon was another way to say Mon. Like, that's just what it is. This is actually Twee's day. That's Twee. He's the god of war. Mars is the god of war. These religions, if you go into them, and it says Mars or Eris, because it depends on what empire was in, that religio-political type of imposement. So the Greeks or the Romans might have called him Mars, and then the Greeks might have called him Eris, and then the people before that called him something else and whatever. But it's basically that same religious template with just the names have changed. Jupiter's akin with Zeus, as far as I know. Look, Jupiter, god of thunder, king of ancient. Does it show that over here? So this was originally this is called Saturn's Day. You know what I mean? That's what it's called now. Kronos is another name for Saturn. They're synonymous. It depends on what culture you're looking at, but it's exactly the same deity. They carry it over or whatever. Yeah, and then you can see all the Latin names. In the Spanish, this is still Sabado, Sabbath day, the cessation day from the Bible, right? But these other days in the biblical manner were just, they were considered first day, second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, sixth day, Sabbath. Um, but they've changed this to Saturday, which means Saturn's day. So all these, just to kind of touch on the stuff of how these so-called Bible believing people are being led astray, is that they're now calling their Sabbath day, which is the day of their Lord, supposedly, um, you know, Yahweh, if you pronounce transliterate the Greek, or excuse me, the Hebrew letters, YHWH, uh, they're calling that day Saturn's day. So it's like, really? You're calling your God's day Saturn's day? Like, I see they do it 99.9999% of the time. I don't think I've ever seen anybody properly not call it that is a so-called Bible believer. And this Sunday, the day of the sun, you know what I mean? And that's another thing. The Bible people have gone to believing, to holding service on Sundays, and this is all Greco-Roman tradition, Universal State Church, which basically the word Catholic means universal. You can look it up in a dictionary, like in a proper dictionary. The word Catholic is synonymous with universal. It's just one or the, just like how you can say Tuesday or Mars Day, it could be universal or Catholic. Like, they mean the same thing. And I'm not trying to like say that I have something against anybody who calls himself, like who's part of that religion or whatever. There's people of all people and all religions and not and all that, but um, that's a fact. So if that bothers you and you're Catholic, then maybe look into stuff more, or maybe consider stuff. But um, that's, or even if you're not Catholic, right? But they've pushed that to Dia Solis because that's their day. That's the universal religion. That sun worship with that swastika is about the sun. It's not about the day of cessation and rest like the Bible believers think, which I shouldn't even be circling this for that on that context because it's not even the right name for it. Something to trip out on though is that what's a year, right? What does a year represent? Like physically, in physics and science, what is a year? It's the orbit of the Earth around the sun, right? I mean, if you want to believe the sun revolves around the Earth or whatever, you're welcome. There's nothing that proves that that's not, that the entire universe doesn't revolve around the Earth. There's nothing that proves that that doesn't happen. Um, I like to keep a totally open mind, but just for the sake of context, let's say that the Earth does in fact rotate around the sun, and that's what a year represents. Well, what does a month represent? A month. That represents how long it takes the moon to go through its phases. If you look up in the sky, it's averages about 29 and a half days. If you look up in the sky, the moon will first look like a little toenail on the right hand side of it. It will light up a little sliver, and then the whole moon will gradually work to the left, and that whole moon will become illuminated. Well, halfway through the month, at that half month, you'll have a half moon. And then when it gets all the way across, it will be a full moon, and that's the end of the month. And then it goes black. Well, actually, then it goes black from right to left for the last half. Okay, so I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking with the half moon thing. I got confused. That would be a quarter of a month. A full moon would be the middle of the month, and then whatever. I should have been looking at pictures so that I didn't let my imagination get carried away there. But yeah, that's what goes on. It's rare. It's every so many years that it actually tends to line up like that for most of the year, with our calendar system. When I first found out about that, coincidentally, it was like halfway through a year that it was lining up almost exactly with the calendar system. But the Gregorian calendar, which coincidentally was put up by a church, is not a church-based calendar, because I used to think that it was like witchcraft or based type of paganism and stuff that was more based on going by moon signs and stuff. But there are it breaks down to the fact that all ancient cultures, including the biblical ones, were all based on the lunisolar system, primarily like the moon for determining months, and that's why you have that word month for that. If you dig into, I don't want to take forever trying to find it, but let's see. Okay, let's go to moon, and then natural satellite or disambiguation, and then where's the come on. Places, other uses. See how sometimes stuff's just hitting? It's like this is Wikipedia, like the world's knowledge consolidated, right? I don't see Mon anywhere on this page. Lunar month. It's for real though. Watch if I punch it in here. Mon. Now we'll go there. This is one of the things with it. You have to kind of like do your own footwork sometimes. Come on, you're not gonna tell me there's a deity called Mon. Currency boat, or maybe I'm missing it on here. Mon people, Mon state, Mon island. Wow. You gotta be kidding me. There, did that have it? Mon people. Okay, it's gotta be in here somewhere. Control F. Just that one. Well, anyway, that's, I mean, if you try and look up so-called Christian stuff, then it really gets bad for trying to find stuff even on Wikipedia. Um, Maybe they took it down. I'm just going to do a general search for Mon. Mon, and then we'll do deity. Spelled that wrong. List of lunar deities. So you'll probably find it through here, which is weird. Like they won't have it on the disambiguation page, but they'll have it here. So this Baal, that's considered like one of, I'll open that up. That's considered like one of the bad guys in the Bible, right? I can't believe I cannot find Mon. You gotta be kidding me. Mon. Keep spelling that wrong. Or and here's something that I thought about mentioning. So that they're basically this Allah, the name of the god in Islam, was historically originates from the moon deity, and that's seems to be very true if you look into the history of it. Um, all of the Arabian, like the Saudi area, especially, they used to all have a lot of different deities, and it was very just very pantheonic without it being all consolidated at a pantheon, right? But so the problem was with they wanted to control people with religion, supposedly. So that's where you get like Mecca. They took their idolic figures and stuff and stuck them all in that booth, and then they told them all to worship this one deity. And so you have the universal sun worshippers who supposedly organized this, and then they put all of those deities in and had them worship the lesser moon god. So that's where that happened. Um, that's a trip. I don't think I've ever seen this as a Wikipedia page specifically. I've had to go find this type of information through other sources, so that's a trip. It's there. So if you go to this Baal Hammon, Lord Hammon, that's what I was going to bring up. So biblically, if we look up this word, it will probably give us a bunch of Bible answers if we do a general search for it. Was the title of horrific meaning owner, Lord, in Northwest Semitic languages spoken, Who was Baal? So right here, they're saying like it's the god of fertility, war, and weather. So it's literally saying, if you translate this word in English, it's saying Lord is the god of fertility, war, and weather, right? I'm going to go ahead and just put Bible after it to qualify it. So 32 verses about, we'll just go to this random page. Not that I never have even been to this site to my knowledge. I'm punching in a random page. Um, I don't even know what translation they're using or anything. But so they join themselves to Lord of. Okay, that's not the best example. Yeah, they're all qualified, so at least they're qualified there. Maybe I should pit. But yeah, it's Lord. So there's a lot of context where that word will be used as though, without qualification. And, obviously often in it, usually with this apostrophe, I think. But anyway, if in the Bible, what my point I was getting to is they'll often have Lord capitalized in the Bible. And so what they're effectively doing is they're changing that name to just a general Lord, like there is no name, but every time that name is, every time you find capital Lord, they're actually replacing that name. I mean, that's kind of a really generic English abbreviation or whatever you want to call it for it, but that's the name. That is the name of the God of the Bible is, and what that is that's a Yod He Vav He or Wah He. So that's where you get like Yehovah or Jehovah, right? But there was no J for, at least the J was a different thing. But Yehovah, you know what I mean? What they're doing is they're filling in the vowels there because there, so to speak, there wasn't like the type of vowels that we have today. And what this is this is a yod, and that yod is a, if I have it right, it's like a yoke, I think. Don't quote me on that. I need to do my research again. So, and then this hey is a breath. That's still there in, it'd actually be more like this, like yeah, wah. And then you could even say it would be like, maybe even that could be a pronunciation of it, Yehovah. Um, you could even do Yahweh like that, like it doesn't matter. It's all just somebody's own interpretation of just like how they want to enunciate those sounds. It wasn't even until the hundreds of AD time or the Common Era, whatever, if you're born into the more constricted system that is ridiculous. That's the whole reason I even got off on this tip was because, they say that they're trying to take this so-called theology out of the BC and AD when it's like, look at how much of this stuff there is. Where it's like, and then you can go into the names of the months and stuff like that. But the thing I was talking about with then the month, and then we get to the week, right? So if we go back 10, 20 minutes ago or whatever, but when you get to the week, it's like, what's a week based on? What's the 7-day week based on? Where do we get that from? According to history, it's from the Bible. That's where we get that from. It's in all cultures, and it's according to the Bible. There were empires that tried to push a 10-day week. That was pretty common, and that was part of taking away that what was the 7-day week apparently, and trying to extend it so that the people couldn't protest for their day of rest as often. It would be they'd have to work for a week and a half, and then maybe they could get a day of rest. That type of a thing. I believe the Egyptians did that. And they weren't the only ones, I don't think. But it never lasted. It never persisted. It always bounced back to the excuse me. Um, it always bounced back to that 7-day week, and that's as far. There's a lot of trippy history. If you go to like ancient Phoenician, about like why are they gonna hide this crap from us? You know what I mean? Phoenicia. I put Phoenician people. Come on. I don't want Phoenician. Phoenicia. It's getting harder and harder to find this stuff all the time. But anyway, if you study language, especially through the Wikipedia rabbit holes, you're going to end up with Phoenicians, the so-called most ancient. Let me look in this. My middle mouse wheel is broken. That's why I use this click and drag thing. Phoenician alphabet. Oh, there we go. So anybody who's familiar with Hebrew, tell me that doesn't look identical. Ancient Hebrew. Like Aramaic. Or pre-Aramaic even. But even if you went to Aramaic, let's open up Aramaic. That was like, alright, there's Aramaic. There's the Aramaic language, according to Wikipedia anyway. Whoa. Aramaic's a little crazier. I've never seen Aramaic that looks exactly like that. Maybe my idea of what Aramaic is that's looking more like Arabic. So that is looking like Aramaic. I could tell you right now what these are. That's a sheen. Actually, I haven't even studied this in so long. This is a yod. Oh, so that's Yeshua. So that would be a yod, sha, ya, sha. And then this is, what would that be? That must be an ayin. I don't know. A noon? But I don't think you pronounce that like that. That's definitely Arabic. Weird. Aramaic, huh? So I guess Arabic and Aramaic, I've never seen so much of this Arabic looking. So that's the square style Aramaic, I guess, according to Wikipedia. And I don't think Wikipedia is that great of a source for language. This looks like real Aramaic. You know, there's a mem, which is like a symbol for water. So anyway, I should have just gone to ancient Hebrew. Alphabet. Which they don't even go back far enough on here. And what's weird is that so often they do this like really fonty looking version of it that's like, I don't think there was any ancient Hebrew that was written that perfectly. And there are stones and stuff with ancient Hebrew. There you go. You know what I mean? It's like it was there. That's the most aligned square version of ancient Hebrew I've ever seen. And that's not even ancient. That's more of like what I consider Aramaic. You can see the G, you can see the E. These are all letters that we have today. They're all there. It's a trip. Yeah, that's like what I would call Middle Hebrew, honestly. And there you go. Okay, this is a good example to compare to the Phoenician. So you've got like the Tet. You can see that there in the Phoenician. The Aleph to the side. If you continue to rotate this around, you can see it's the letter A, the very first letter, the letter A in their alphabet. There it is. Tell me that's not the letter A on its side. What it really is it's a bullhead. It's the L, the Al. And these two horns are supposed to be poking. The A was originally upside down. It wasn't like this looking thing right here, or that. It was like this. You see it? That's an ox head. Because that's what it meant. It meant the strength, the leader. And that's the thing with these ancient languages, with these, what was it called? They're glyphs, but they're also an alphabet, which alphabet comes from the term Aleph Bet, which is, if you come over here to these languages, Aleph Bet. Yeah, that looks like a lowercase g, and that is where we got the lowercase g from, was this symbol, but it actually was the ba, like is basically a G represented a B way back in the day, and then we flipped things around um, since then, so that now we have the B and all that. But anyway, if you can just manage to wrap your head around that for a moment, this is the Aleph Bet, and so that's what they call it. It's the Aleph Bet because that was the easiest way to describe it. If you want to go back to like ancient Hebrew, it was probably called like the All Bet because the Aleph is a little bit more leaning towards the Aramaic, maybe even Arabic times, where they actually begin to call it the Aleph instead of just the All for the ox. And then, if I have this right, these symbols aren't old enough. See, this ancient Hebrew isn't even really the ancient Hebrew that they're showing us. Like, you have to go outside of Wikipedia because Wikipedia is kind of tainted. But this is kind of my point is that this ancient Phoenician, this was a trade language. This is like what bad English is today globally. Like globally, just like how the dollar, the petrodollar, the English dollar, the American dollar is used as like the global dominant trade currency, right? You know, there's other currencies used in the world, but basically, most places that dollar, that U.S. dollar, at least up to this minute, is you're going to be able to do something with that. There's the Q, the Kof. Originally, this was on its side too. All these have been rotated, and it's like, why did they disturb these so much? But it used to be on its side with a flat line and a circle through the flat line, and it represented a sun at the horizon, and it was always had the Q sound. But then as it evolved, it became more of like on a stick, like a P. But you can see how similar that is to that Q. I mean, give me a break. This is thousands and thousands of years ago, and there's that. This is the S, the sheen, but you can tell that's a W, right? There's the X, it's a T, a ta. That was the last. This would be like the alpha and the omega, the A and the Z kind of thing. Um, this is a thorn. This is the hit. This is a real bad version of it, but what does hit sound like? Does it sound like eight? Hate. Eight. That's where we got our eight from, literally. Also, where we get rid of these two, some of the drawings have it extended. That's where we also got the H from. You know what I mean? Literally, all these glyphs. You can look it up. I always want to make an animation from like the ancient Hebrew, the oldest we can find, all the way to modern American. You know, even, and you can watch these all morph into our roughly. I mean, for the most part, the majority of them. There's of course some exceptions, and you know this changed to the lowercase g. It also there's another way to draw this that changed to the uppercase G because this is supposed to be, if I've got it right, like it's supposed to be like representative of like a tent structure of a house, and that's what this G represents. The L for Lamed, this is sort of where we got our J from as well. What a trip. Oh, I guess this is to show, maybe this is trying to represent, this must be the Resh, how it kind of turned into an R. But that's a person's head usually. The Meme is just supposed to be the water waves without this line. This line was added later. But the thing with the Aleph Bet was that it was an alphabet. The alphabet is the Greek way of saying Aleph Bet, which of course were Greco-Roman. So if you trace back everything that we say and all these like deities and all this stuff associated with our days and times, it's all goes back to Greco-Roman religion. Um, but yeah, let me do ancient Hebrew in here because Wikipedia drops off. They don't really get into the real ancient Hebrew. Here's a very good site for a lot of information. It's kind of weird though where you land on this site, and I don't know, it's kind of hit or miss. So let's go to the alphabet, the ancient Hebrew alphabet. Oh man, I hate trying to find stuff on this site because it's just, in my opinion, it's not organized very consistently. Okay, the ancient pictographic alphabet, that's what we want. Okay, there's the A. You see how that's a bullhead? How that's definitely more. There's that Y. I'm going to close this one out. So there's the Aleph. If I could find something in between. So we'll do ancient Hebrew. There should be some charts up. Images. And these charts are never quite good enough, but they start to show. So there you can see how it's like. And then over here, this is what we think of as supposedly like modern day Hebrew. Not at all. This is modern day Chaldean script, which according to the biblical record and history itself was, the Chaldeans, the Babylonians, which really existed. That was the style they wrote more. Sometimes I think they'll refer to this as like the modern square Hebrew script. It's not. I mean, when you look, they've tried to like reconcile how this somehow relates to that, or like, really? How did this turn into that? You can actually see closer representations of our language to ancient Hebrew and, therefore Roman language and Latin and stuff like that than you can with this so-called Hebrew script a lot of times. I mean, there's some similarity, but it's like, give me a break. So there's the G. There's a G laying flat. There's that original meme I was telling you about. And that's cool they got that because that does tend to go both ways. The ayin was literally an I to begin with. And then here you go, the Sade, which I think also stands for seed. So anyway, what I was getting at is that all these things have these meanings. Ox head, strong, power, leader, tent, family, house. So father is Ab. Bet. Ab. Right? That's how you say father. Guess what? Go look it up in Cherokee. In modern Cherokee, where they even took over their language and made them use the Greco-Roman script, which is ugly and horrible in my opinion. But they didn't change the words. They just changed the way they're written. And it blew my mind when my half Cherokee friend, when he's like, he bust open his thing and he's like, guess how you say dad? And I was like, let me guess, Ob. Because we were talking about some of these connections and stuff. And he's like, yep, Ob. It's like, no freaking way. Even though I totally expected it and could totally believe it, it was like, it's still mind-blowing. All languages evolved from this language right here, from this ancient Hebrew. And I think you can even see how they claim, one of the major claims, especially down the Wikipedia rabbit holes, is that this ancient Phoenician is the oldest known language. And that's BS, because you tell me whether that came first. I mean, this is a one-off example. Like I said, if you gather the pieces yourself and look at it, you can see how it started out. Like even this one, it's on its side. Like you can tell the most oldest stuff that you'll see will have this A pointing down. And then the even older stuff will have it more like that. That's about the oldest I've seen. You could argue the hieroglyphs. You can't trust the timelines, honestly. I mean, you can. That's up to you. I'm not going to, because one of the most famous Egyptian scholars themselves says, hey, the best we have is a bunch of rags and tatters of these timelines. And, there's claims, you're going to see that it's like, they're going to claim that a lot of the Egyptian hieroglyphs are older than this stuff. But the fact is I don't think it's true. When I dig in and I do my research, it doesn't seem to be true, because I don't go by the timelines of Egyptian scholars. I take them into consideration. I've got notebooks full of that kind of stuff, but I don't lean on that as like all historical fact, because what was going on throughout the 1900s to some degree was they would adjust those timelines because they realized, this is like history that they aren't for sure about, right? The Dead Sea Scrolls weren't even discovered till the mid 1900s, like just to throw something out there, but they were constantly shifting and adjusting timelines. And that's honestly where, if you dig in, why they think the Earth is billions of years old and everything's billions or tens and hundreds of thousands of years it took for whatever to happen, which a lot of modern stuff has proved that that's not necessarily the case. Like with that huge tsunami that hit India, how quick that shift happened in the ocean. They thought minimum those kinds of shifts always took a minimum of thousands of years. You know what I mean? And that happened like in a split second. So it's like, or in 1 second, literally. So that just goes to show what they do is they keep spreading these things apart to reconcile them. And it's different camps. It's like the Egyptian camp doing it over here, and the Hebrew, more biblical, kind of scholarly related people over here doing it. And so you end up with these conflicting timelines that just don't ever line up. And any point, change is strong as the weakest link. And as soon as that starts getting thrown off, whatever. So you kind of have to determine this stuff for yourself. But the Egyptian language was like purely uh, glyphic. Like it didn't seem to be like alphabetic so much. And that's where you get like those are what I considered in general just to be like Eastern style languages, because for the most part you can go with like the ancient Asian languages and stuff where they're very glyphic. Like they do have more of alphabetic styles now in the more modern eras, but way back it was just pure like tons of glyphs, tons of different pictures, picture for everything or combinations of pictures to represent something, which you could almost argue that to be an alphabet, but it wasn't that concise. It wasn't like 20 to 30 characters or something. Um, but with that ancient Hebrew, what you have is you have both. You have with this stuff, every one of these things has a meaning as well as a pronunciation, and it is in a consolidated alphabet thing. So that it basically branched out for the most part from the center of the world, coincidentally for the almost straight across the board. The more purely glyphic languages were eastward. I mean, arguably, or like even southeastward, because like Egypt was like if you're going from like Jerusalem, where this Hebrew, that area roughly, Babylon, like I don't know if it'd be technically. I don't think it's the Middle East according to our modern ideas of it. I think it's like the Near East. I don't know. It's basically the Middle East, but the part of the Middle East, the Palestinian Israeli area now. And if you think of it from there, like biblically speaking, Jerusalem is the center point. If you don't know where they're talking about, they're talking about that area. So if you go from there and you go east, it's going to be mostly predominantly glyphic languages. And then if you go down to Egypt, you're going to find that a lot too. You will find also in the Egyptian hieroglyphic charts, you will find pretty close but a rough version of this same little subset of this ancient Hebrew in their charts of glyphs, but they're like unused. So I just thought that what a trip. I mean, they're used sometimes and stuff, but not nearly to the extent their other glyphs are used. It's just almost like they adopted it. Like they just brought it in and were like, "Oh, here, add this to the stack." Kind of. That's my interpretation purely. That's not like even I wouldn't even say scholarly. That's just there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of scholarly information, or it seems to be just a very few opinions or something. But I thought that's what a trip, that they have that in there, or for the most part, kind of sort of distorted. So that says to me, was that just a more ancient thing? Like, why would they add something without meaning to their already just so meaningful stuff? Which this looks very Egyptian. That jar looking thing right there looks Egyptian to me. But this is supposedly old stuff. I have to think that these are probably just scratches in a wall and somebody went over it with like a paint program and highlighted them. But you can see all of that stuff. Here we go. And there's ways to tell too, like I'd rather, hopefully you might forget a lot of what I'm saying and you could go look at this stuff with a fresh perspective and make your own conclusions. But you can look at things like this Kof is standing up. It's not that line with the circle with the horizon, which I think is the oldest version. So that kind of tells me that, if this is accurate from whatever rock of a time period, this wouldn't be the oldest carvings you're going to find because this Kof is standing up. So that says this is slightly newer than being the oldest. This is a cutting blade. And then like the Lamed and the Yod and stuff. So it's a right to left language. And the theories behind that for the stuff that's right to left was because most people favor their right hand, and you hold the chisel in your left hand and your hammer in your right hand, so it would be easier to chisel this way. But then once they started inking things on papyrus pulp, um, which is where we get paper from, right? That term, even though now we're using wood pulp instead of papyrus. Then most people being right-handed, they would smudge their hand across that ink that actually back then especially took even more time to dry. So they started writing right to left, roughly probably around the time of early ancient Greece. And that's another thing too, ancient Greek. Wow, should have brought that one up. I might have to punch in ancient Greek alphabet. So there you can see alpha, beta, gamma, right? Alpha, beta, gamma. Alpha, alpha, beta, g. Gimel, they call it here, right? Or gim in ancient. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, dalet. Look at that. What does that look like? Tell me that doesn't look kind of like a Greek, ancient Greek delta, the triangle. And then an H. A, B, G, D, H. Let's see what it is over here. A, B, G, D. Oh, and then they go epsilon. Um, and this is actually more modern Greek too, but I think it's still the same order on the ancient. Let me type ancient Greek. Oh, alphabet. Now they're giving us the modern Greek alphabet. Not helping. Oh, give me a break. So you end up at the edge of the cliff when you start trying to research some of this stuff, but once you get there, you realize you can start putting pieces together. We need the ancient, the truly ancient Greek. None of this is ancient. I think, who created the alphabet? Um, so if you look there, this is kind of like middle. This is weird, but I don't know. It's kind of cool. It's a middle point. So you can see there's that ox head. They've changed the B to the B. Um, weird symbol for the G. There's the delta, way more like a triangle. The epsilon. I'm sure you've seen that E looking thing. And right here, the hey. So, oh, they did. They just stopped pronouncing it like a hey, but they actually kept this weird, more moderny Aramaic looking hey. Then this is literally a person, man with arms raised. Look, reveal breath. Like hey, it's literally that. And where do you think we get the word hey from? It's crazy some of the stuff that's lasted so long. It's such a trip. There's the I, probably the H. Ita. It's not necessarily like these sounds aren't necessarily going to coincide or whatever, like you can see. But what's weird is they coincide more, what we think of them now, they coincide more with the ancient Hebrew than they do with even like this middle of history Greek stuff. But you can find, what I was looking for was the left to right, like the very beginning, which I guess I've kind of proven, right through here that a lot of this is the same as if you go over here and look at like what is going on here. You can tell that the Greek is literally, if you had this written right to left and you flip it around left to right, that's what the very most ancient Greek was like evolved from. It's such a trip. But anyway, that's something that you got to do as much manual labor as you get spoon fed on it, which I like because I don't like to go purely down. If you get spoon fed too much after just a matter of minutes of it, if it's really good, then your mind's going to shut off and you're going to go into intake mode and you're just going to be like, tell me all about it. You've passed my little 5-minute test of credit worthiness and I, until you make it's going to be require a more and more major contradiction for me to shut that off. That's the typical human psychology of it, right? So Like maybe I'm already doing that to you, so I'm glad that I'm hitting these like speed bumps because we got to click out. We got to manually check everything ourselves. And even that's not good enough. Keep going and the stuff you'll find. So that opens up a lot of questions. Like there's a lot of stuff of like why are these certain narratives being pushed on certain things, or like some things are acted like we don't know the history of it, but it's literally just nobody's going back and making those connections, you know? I mean, obviously some people are to some degree here. Like this is usually roughly the degree I'll see it to is exactly this right here. But you can tell there's tons of missing stuff. We don't see the A right side up. We don't see the A, this exact symbol straight pointed straight down, which I have seen though. You know, obviously we've all seen the A straight up and down, the completely upside down ox head. But yeah. And so anyway, with the whole biblical idea is that these words like Ob, I need to go and do some research and get some better examples, but these words evolve like throughout biblical literature. Like even the word dove and stuff like that, if you dig into stuff, you can see how, like, even to say there's a checksum there, which is basically like if you say this equals 1, this equals 2, this equals 3, this equals 4, this equals 5, and then, you know, you write something out and then go add them up and make sure that it equals 5 plus 4 plus 3 plus 2 plus 1 or whatever. That's kind of like how a checksum works. But so if I write you a letter and I add up the values of all, you know, a message kind of letter, if I add up all the values of all the characters, all the letters and that, if we assign them values like that, and then I say, hey, I send you a message and I say this equals 556 or something, so then you could sit there and add up, or have a computer program if it's digital or whatever, and say, you know, oh, this only equaled 540, so this probably isn't the complete message, you know. But that's a loose checksum. There's obviously you could have two different messages that add up to the same number, so then you get into more and more process intensive versions of doing stuff, which becomes, then you get into the cryptographic territory more. But there's always a chance for a collision, what they call a collision, which is where two different sources provide that same final value, that same like checksum value or whatever you want to think of it as. But the more cryptographically intense you get, the less likely, you know, it becomes like 1 in billions of a chance to for that to happen. So probably not going to happen, but there is there is a shot in the entire universe. One thing too that I've heard is that if two galaxies were to like pass through each other, they would literally just pass through each other. Like the chance of like even planets and stars and stuff would not collide. I don't know. I haven't dug into that myself too deeply, but just, you know, along the ways I've heard that once or twice, stuff along those lines, and I think like, whoa, I wonder if like maybe gravitational things or whatever, like what kinds of effects those might have. But supposedly the universe is, you know, everything in the universe is so vast and so far apart. Like what we see in our solar system is like the closest that objects tend to get, you know. But the claim is that everything, like the distance between our solar system and the next one and stuff like that, so like you have these solar systems where everything is in some sort of harmonious cycle, but the things that are farther apart, not to say that they're not in a harmonious cycle, but if you take two galaxies and pass them through each other, there's way more empty space than there is solid bodies there. So it's kind of like if you use like a really modern cryptographic scheme, that yeah, there probably could be a few collisions in there, because if you get into like billions of massive body particles or something, then there could be, but very unlikely. So something to trip out on. Anyway, I never thought I would talk this long. I'm done.